Salutations, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. Here I am at the Tower of London. You can see it behind me. It's not just a tower, despite the name, it's a castle. And I'm filming with this angle, which is not usually shown, just to show you how big the moat is, how wide it is, how long it is. All right, and it's hard by the River Thames. So the moat really was a moat, as in they had water flowing through it in the old days. Now, usually it wasn't very deep, it was muddy more than watery. But as you can imagine, if you were an attacker, that was going to be a bit of an obstacle, being stuck in the mud. Even in the height of summer, it would be very muddy. In winter, there might be several feet of water in there, or snow or ice, things like that. Occasionally dangerous animals released there. You see a wooden walkway there towards the Thames. People used to arrive by boat to Traitor's Gate, or even if they weren't actually a traitor, because some high-value prisoners were kept there. I know we have this association with this place and state prisoners, but that was really from the 16th century onwards, when the English royal family were sort of squabbling with each other for the crown, and some people were executed there. The number of people executed there is actually very low. It's only about 20. But the thing is, they're mostly very prominent. And even, certainly the First World War, some people were executed by firing squad there. German spies are detected. There you can see a trebuchet. Where is it? Right of that corner there. Sorry, I can see it with the naked eye better. Maybe this will be a better angle for you. They don't use it anymore, like a massive catapult. All right, so in medieval siege warfare, sometimes using those to fling big stones, anything burning, even dead animals, dead enemy in there, supposedly to spread disease, but also demoralize them, part of a psychological operation. So you can see the battlements there, the arrow slits. So there's an archer standing behind there. He can angle quite widely to fire at us. It's quite difficult for us to angle it correctly to hit him with the arrow there. So you can see there tourists walking around in there. Now, the keep in the middle, the main building, is called the White Tower. It's not actually white, it's a sort of lighter colour grey. Now the word dungeon for us, we know that's a sort of underground prison in a castle, but that's derived from the French word donjon, meaning keep, as in the major building of a castle. So this one was a very tough nut to crack, and was never successfully stormed or besieged. Because, well, it's so central. I mean, for a long time it was the largest castle in England, right here in the middle of the capital, had an outer curtain wall and an inner curtain wall. The Thames was a bit of a defence in itself. It was quite close to London Bridge, which is that away, about a mile west of here, which for centuries was the only bridge across the Thames in London. This one here, Tower Bridge, is only built in 1894. So this was a royal residence like many others, and kings and queens spent time here. Henry VIII had 60 palaces at one stage. He ruled from 1509 to 1547, and he was born at Greenwich Palace, which no longer exists. They are not the original building, that away, a few miles to the east. Anyway, what else about this place? So there's the Princes in the Tower, which helped to give it a sinister reputation. In April of 1483, King Edward IV died, leaving his son, the 12-year-old Edward V, as king, and Edward V's younger brother was Richard of Shrewsbury. But owing to the tenderness of their years, the country was to be ruled on the behalf of Edward V by his uncle Richard III. So Richard III being the brother of the late Edward IV. And that was that, and the two princes in the tower were here in the Tower of London, which in those days was just another royal residence. Nothing unusual, nothing disturbing about the fact that we're here. And they were playing all the rest of it, but being a huge complex, there were hundreds of soldiers and servants and so on around. And then after a couple of months, they disappeared from public view. Whatever happened to them? So then their uncle, Richard III, issued this document, Titulus Regius, if I got that right, as a sort of title of the king, saying that these two boys were unnuptially solemnized, as to say they were born outside of marriage and had no right to inherit the crown. And that he was going to be king, so the coronation, which had been scheduled for his nephew, was then turned into his coronation, and then he was duly crowned king. So whatever happened to those boys? Well, they just disappeared, he said. Had they died, you display the body. They could have died of an illness. Had they run away? Why would they run away? Had they been kidnapped? Wouldn't you say that and raise a hue and cry to try and rescue these children? But no, they were never seen again. And on what basis could he claim that they were born outside of marriage? It was a rather spurious one, it was quite complicated, about their mother having been previously engaged to so-and-so, and therefore their parents' marriage was bigamous. Anyway, never seen again. So Richard III, the much maligned Richard III, indeed there's a Richard III Society which tries to blazon forth his glorious name, as they would see it, or the Society of the White Boar. It was originally founded in the 1920s by a Liverpool surgeon under that name, the Society of the White Boar, because that was his symbol, not boar as in boring, but as in a wild pig, B-O-A-R. Anyway, so Richard III, he was the last monarch of the Plantagenet dynasty, and then his distant relative Henry VII had spent most of his life in exile. Henry VII, his father, had been killed when Henry VII was very young. This is the time of the Wars of the Roses, from 1455 to 1485, 30 years. However, there were very long periods of peace in the middle of the Wars of the Roses. So it's not the case there was continuous fighting. It's only in the early 19th century when the celebrated novelist Sir Walter Scott, looking back on this time, almost 400 years in arrear he was looking, and he dubbed it the Wars of the Roses, as in the White Rose of York and the Red Rose of Lancaster. It always goes back to King Edward III, who had 5 sons. Well, only 4 of them had descendants. But it's the descendants of those 4 sons fighting amongst each other for the crown. You might say, wait a second, there are 4 sons, but only 2 sides. Well, that's true, because sometimes cousins married each other. Not necessarily first cousins, but could be second cousins, could be third cousins. So those are the 2 sides, because one of the sides had the title Duke of York, and the other one had the title Duke of Lancaster. Obviously, York is a city in northern England, which for a long time was the northern capital, the second largest city in the kingdom, and Lancaster is also northern England, or northwest. And there's the most lively rivalry between the 2 counties. And the Wars of the Roses continues to this very day, as they would tell you. But the Roses match, which is a game of cricket, so slightly less bloody than the Wars of the Roses. I don't know what they're doing with these pieces of wood here. And when there was a centenary of the First World War, this place was covered in red poppies, that symbol of the First World War. People this time of year, late October, early November, wearing the poppy to remember all the British soldiers, sailors and airmen killed in the First World War and in all subsequent conflicts. And there was one poppy for each of the soldiers killed, British soldiers, sailors or airmen killed, 800,000. Almost filled it up. A bit of the old foundations they found there. But anyway, Tower of London, it was William the Conqueror, when he came over in 1066, he pretty soon started building this sort of ideal location, controlling a very strategic point. Tower Hill is the tube station to come here. Not really much of a hill, we're just up that way, a slight rise from where we are, and rather less historic or beautiful there, that away to the tube station as an underground railway station. So where was I? About the princes and the tower. So they just disappeared, and so cut a long story short, Henry VII came from Brittany, as in that French peninsula. When he landed in Wales, because he was partly Welsh. He raised the Welsh dragon flag, and obviously the Red Rose. He was a Lancastrian, whereas his distant cousin Henry VII was a Yorkist. If you believe William Shakespeare, go to Henry VI Part 1, one of his many plays, one of his least performed plays actually. There's this meeting in the Temple Garden in London where one of the noblemen was asked to pick sides in the Wars of the Roses. Are you going to pluck a red rose or white rose to indicate your allegiance? I don't recall which one he did, but that's not true. And indeed, the rose symbols were hardly used at the time. It was only right after this they did it. I mean, so Shakespeare, he performed an elegant assassination of Richard III's character, because obviously Shakespeare's writing late 16th century to the early 17th century, and the Lancasters having won, he wanted to write sort of dramatic hagiographies of their ancestors and to demonize their foes. So Richard III is presented as the archetypal anti-hero. And yes, when his body was discovered buried under a car park in Leicester about 7 years ago, and there was all this story: did he really have a bent spine? If you watch that play, Richard III by William Shakespeare, and I can't remember the whole of the soliloquy, which is the opening of the play, saying, "Now is the winter of our discontent, made bright summer by this young son of York. Now are our crude alarms turned to delightful measures." I'm sure I've got lots of it wrong, but I, who am not made for sportive pleasures, and I can't remember, rudely stamped, come into this world not half formed, things like that. I've obviously got the verbiage slightly wrong, but He was somewhat disabled with a congenital spinal condition, not as severe as you might think when they discovered his skeleton. But people were very bigoted towards the physically disabled in those days and felt there was some sort of outward expression of some inward wickedry, even though actually Jesus in the Bible explicitly says that anyone who's disabled is not to be mistreated, and no, it doesn't indicate that they are a bad person. Look at that, one of the yeomen of the guard, to give them their correct name. If you do look around the Tower of London, you'll see these chaps, some of them women actually, and that's the winter uniform, the dark blue uniform. Yeomen of the guard. They're commonly called beef eaters, as in they eat beef to keep them strong. There's a bit of glare off that. You probably can't see on his chest. It says ER, as in Elizabeth Regina, Elizabeth the Queen in Latin. So they're ex-soldiers, sailors, Air Force personnel, but they have to reach non-commissioned officer rank or above. And in the Tower of London, you will see these ravens, these black birds, okay? And the story goes that if they fly away, the country will face calamity. So just to make sure that doesn't happen, their wings are clipped and they're given raw meat every day. Having said that, the story about if they fly away, the country will face disaster, that one was only invented in the 1950s. It's not as hoary as you might wish to believe. So I was very disappointed by that urban myth. I thought that one had gone on for centuries. What else about the Tower of London? Okay, and actually in the First World War there was some sort of wooden building here, and that's where the German spies who were arrested were executed by firing squad. I can't remember the first one's name. Was it Carl Lodi? And he was a travel agent, spoke flawless English, posed as an American, and was arrested in Ireland. He'd been to London, up to Edinburgh, over to Ireland, part of the United Kingdom at the time, and he picked up various pieces of intelligence. He'd been sending letters to, I think, the Netherlands, a neutral country, and the UK had figured out that the address he was sending to them was actually an address for German intelligence, and he tipped them off about some sort of some ship leaving Edinburgh, which the German U-boat sank. So he did achieve that, but he was caught, executed by firing squad. And right before he was due to be killed, he said to the man commanding the firing squad, "I don't suppose you'll shake hands with the German spy?" And the British officer said, "No, but I will shake hands with a very brave man," because Lodi, he met his death with exceptional fortitude. So some of the soldiers felt very sorry for him. He was doing his duty, wasn't an immoral person. Anyway, more about these yeomen of the guard if you go in there. You can see what they're like. In the summer, they're well red rather than this dark blue. Okay. So maybe we'll go back to the princes in the Tower, or where was I? Richard III. So the Battle of Bosworth, the 22nd of August 1485, and that's when Richard III, he led from the front. He actually went into the battle. Often kings hung around at the back to direct operations, but also to skedaddle if it was going wrong. But that gave heart to his men, and perhaps the crucial factor was the Stanley family. And they stood off. Which way they're going to go, it wasn't very clear. And Richard II had taken the precaution of taking Lord George Strange, this child of the Stanley family, hostage, and saying, "And if you don't come in on my side, your boy will be killed." And when they were seen to be neutral, he ordered the child to be put to death. His orders were not obeyed. Anyway, so the Stanleys did intervene, but on the side of Henry VII. And Henry VII was outnumbered 2-1 at least at the beginning of the battle. But anyway, Richard III was slain. His body was stripped naked, taken on a horse to Leicester, the town very close by, city very close by, I should say, displayed for 3 days in Abbey to scotch any rumours he survived. He was killed, he was recognised, everyone knew it was him who was killed, not an imposter, and that's why he was buried without much ado. Okay, so that was that. Henry VII proceeded on to London, and those who supported Richard III were forgiven, so long as they then swore allegiance to Henry VII. That was that, but Henry VII, he also said he agreed with Titulus Regius, as in that those princes of the Tower were born outside of marriage. The whole thing about this Titulus Regius has only made sense if he was absolutely certain these two boys were dead. So did he have some sort of hand in it? Years later, these investigations, and various witnesses said, yes, we know who suffocated them. I suffocated them in the Tower of London. But in 1672, two skeletons of children were discovered in here, skeletons of boys aged roughly 8 and 10. But wait a second, the princes in the Tower were 10 and 12 when they disappeared. And an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old is such a big difference in size. It couldn't have been them. Having said that, the 10-year-old skeleton could be the 12-year-old. You can't be that precise. These boys were not noted for being particularly small or particularly large. So those could be confused. The one thing is, what about the 12-year-old's body? And it doesn't account for him, and it doesn't account for the 8-year-old male skeleton buried under a staircase. Why would you bury them under the staircase? Just by chance in 1672 they found these two children's skeletons. So the mystery is still there, the jury's still out on this one. Anyway, more about the Tower of London. You can see those grey turrets in the distance behind the trees. That is the White Tower, the real centre to it. So if you do come here, I recommend you come as early as possible because they're big queues. The crown jewels is kept there. The Queen's crown, that is, her various jewels, her orb, her sceptre. The Koh i Noor, as in the Mountain of Light, which some regard as the most precious diamond on Earth. Said in the 16th century, it was said it was so precious it could buy enough food for the whole world to eat for 3 days. It passed through various hands. Obviously, it originally came from India, and it's here. Some Indians are saying they'd rather like it back. So that is the Tower of London. So get here at opening time. I would recommend to you. If you come here, in a midweek, that's better than coming on the weekend. Don't come on a public holiday, okay? More about these yeomen of the guard. They can be women, but we always call them yeomen of the guard. Here's a woman who's one of them. She's obviously, as I say, you see her medals on her chest. She will have served in the British Armed Forces for quite a few years before being allowed to do this. They not only have to be a former warrant officer, but also quite good with the tourists, giving them the patter, entertaining. And ER, you can't really make it out, Elizabeth Regina. She's got the Thistle of Scotland and the Shamrock of Ireland. OK, most of Ireland, we're not in the UK. And do they have a symbol for England? Not really. Okay, you can see the crown in there with the Koh i Noor. And here's an aerial view of the Tower of London. Get some idea of the scale of the place, the two walls, and right beside the River Thames. In the middle is the White Tower. It's coming up for 1,000 years, but obviously it wasn't built all at once. It was built over centuries. It has changed. Things have been demolished, renovated, rebuilt. So it's not all original. When he started building it in the 1070s, William the Conqueror, he didn't succeed immediately. It took a very long time. You do see soldiers there, and as recent as the 1950s, it was used as an army barracks as well as for various other purposes. And in the Second World War, some German prisoners of war were held here. See in the gates E2R Elisabetha Regina Secundus, as in Queen Elizabeth II in Latin. There's some sort of ceremony of the keys here each night. I don't know which one of the beef eaters are saying, whose keys are these? And they have to say Queen Elizabeth's keys. A certain man called John Lewis told that tale at Chambers in about 1997 to widespread ridicule, laughter, scorn. Anyway, so above the middle tower here, you can see the royal coat of arms, the lion, the unicorn, Dieu est mon droit on that garter, God of my right, and On y soit qui mal y pense, shame upon him who thinks badly of it. Two of the mottos of the British royal family. Now that's why there's that essay by George Orwell, The Lion and the Unicorn, as in these are symbols of the United Kingdom. And they're strange symbols. It tells you how much myth-making goes into national identity. There are no unicorns, and there have never been lions in the wild here. There were a few lions in there. There was a menagerie well into the 19th century. Various beasts kept for the royal delight. Anyway, so you can get a boat from here, Tower Pier. Some of the more sort of practical river busters and some of the cruise boats. There it is, the Shard. Okay, so it's just about closing time there. It seems that tourists are going out, they're not going in to this place. I'm walking on cobblestone. Don't you find that pleasing? We should have it more all over the place. So this is obviously for horses because it's an uneven surface, gives them better grip. A very smooth surface makes them liable to slip. But British Army horses have to ride over ordinary surfaces, ordinary asphalt, but very seldom slip, fortunately. I don't know how they managed to train them. Okay, so having a better view of this place. Bear in mind it's November, so not particularly high tourist season. It'll give you an idea what it'll be like in August. It'll be absolutely manic, all right? So just try and avoid peak times. If you want to see the crown jewels, when you get in there, I would say do that first, the very first thing you do, because then you can see it before a massive queue builds up. So more images of yeomen of the guard, commonly called beef eaters. That's why there's beef eater gin. What else am I going to point out? Yeah, because I remember being here at Easter time once, and there was quite a big queue. We spent about 3 hours. We could have spent all day in there. And as we were leaving, the queue was just building up frighteningly. So you don't have to wait for ages. So another thing I should point out is part of the Wars and the Roses. Yeah, Henry VI, I won't tell you his whole story, is overthrown twice. The second time he was overthrown, then his son Edward of Westminster was killed fighting at the Battle of Tewkesbury, age 17, and Henry VI was held here at the Tower of London, and indeed he was stabbed to death here in May, I can't remember which exact day, in 1471, and that's why there's a ceremony in the room where he was murdered every year. A red rose is laid, because it's a Lancastrian red rose, and they say, on such and such a day, our beloved founder, King Henry VI, was most foully done to death, in memory whereof I lay this rose. And at Eton they do that same ceremony in the chapel on the day of his obit, as in his obituary. So you can't see it from this angle, but where these people are standing on that wall, if you're on the river, you'll be able to see the words Traitors' Gate, as in traitors taken by boat here to the Tower of London and detained. So some people were executed there. For example, Anne Boleyn, buried there in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, St. Peter to the chains. That's what ad Vincula means. Anything else I should point out about this place? Yeah, so it's wonderfully interactive, so many things to see, suits of armor, various weapons from the olden days. So they try to make it fun. They have people dressed up in various costumes from down the centuries, like 11th century man-at-arms or 20th century suffragette, as in a woman campaigning for women to have the right to vote and so forth. This is where it is. Okay, it says it right on the riverside, Traitors' Gate, and indeed it says it here, if I got that right. Okay, so this is Traitors' Gate. Oh, and they do have a bit of water flowing in. Traitors' Gate, they would have let a lot of more water flow through here. St. Thomas's Tower, and down there Traitors' Gate. I'm not sure if you can read it. Can you read it, Traitors' Gate? It's probably a bit too far away for you to read. Okay, so they would come right up to here from the river. Here's the river, and they'd be able to go under where I'm standing now, and then that over to Traitors' Gate like that. Hope you haven't gone dizzy with all this turning around. Anything else you might want to know about the Tower of London? So there are a few soldiers based there even now, I think during the daytime. I'm not sure they stay there overnight, perhaps to guard the crown jewels. There was a Captain Blood who in the 17th century notoriously stole the crown jewels. I think he returned them as well. Now you look at the weather vanes up high, that is the White Tower in the middle, and the weather vanes, you can't see them from so far away. They've got a crown on top of them. They've got the Royal Coat of Arms, which is the gold harp of Ireland on a field of St. Patrick's blue. That's the real colour of Ireland, blue, not green. And the three lions passant of England, these red lions on a gold field. And then they've got the Lion Rampant of Scotland, a red lion on a gold field, yes. So, field being the background of the flag. So I walked almost the whole circumference of it. So, you're getting an idea of the dimensions of this place. So roomy, you might agree. And there's a constable of the tower. He or she is the person in charge of the tower, looking after it on behalf of the king. Now, a castle would often have a steward. The steward is in charge of the kitchens, not really cooking, but making sure there's enough food and drink. Now, because the castles were besieged, this really mattered, that they had sufficient provisions to withstand the siege. And steward with a D on the end obviously became more and more of an important job. So sometimes it became a surname, Stewart, with a T on the end. And there was, let me see, Robert the Bruce of Scotland had a daughter, Marjorie, had no sons. Marjorie married the steward of the king for one of his crucial castles. And that's why the Stuart dynasty was born in Scotland, S-T-E-W-A-R-T, as they were originally. But when Mary, Queen of Scots, a Stuart, was in France, the French changed the spelling to S-T-U-A-R-T. So Stuart can obviously be a personal name, not just a surname. Okay, so you get the idea of the dimensions of this place. So that's why a steward of the castle was so important. I know steward means like a waiter these days, or air steward, like air stewardess. Can be a barman, things like that. Same like butler comes from a castle as well. Butler is really a bastardization of bottler, because he would open bottles and pour the wine for the lord of the castle, or the king if it really was a royal castle. Because obviously the king would have many castles, but so only visit them just occasionally. Well, we could be here all day. There are so many tales I could regale you with about the Tower of London, but perhaps that's enough for one video. And we are in a place that's absolutely dense with history and things to see. Just over my shoulder there is Tower Bridge, and over there that is London City Hall. And then there is the Shard, who is there's a bit too much glare, can't really make it out very well. And then beyond that is HMS Belfast, that warship. There, you're seeing the warship, I suppose. Okay. Oh, and it's quite a bright sunset. So that's why you can't see things so clearly, because of the refulgency. All right, I shall switch it off now.